Hi, my name is Terry Pearson, and I'm going to be reading a story from my new book, No More Days. You can find it on Amazon, and you can find more scary stories on my page, something spooky. Today, I'm going to be reading Hellhound Cry. Albert Walker sat beneath a black willow tree and strummed his guitar. It was a dirty, old, slightly splintered Gibson Kalamazoo. He picked at the rusted strings indifferently, listening more to the sounds of the swamp. His tune was just part of the cacophony of insects and animal noises, and those other ambient sounds of the night that seemed to close in on things and make the air feel like a coffin. One of his overalls was busted, and the strap drooped down with a sad, buttonless hole. His white shirt was stained so many different colors it was impossible to tell what any of them were, and his shoes were ripped and torn, the whole top half of one separated from the sole in the front. The curly hair on his head was kept short and simple, and his face was creased with hard work and worries. Off in the distance, he heard the dejected whistle of a train. It snuck into the wet, overgrown marshland and disguised itself as something almost natural. Then there was another howl, but closer and more lonesome. Bestial and searching, it seemed to call back to the train and harmonize the next blowing of the whistle. His spine tingled in a way he had only ever heard about. Albert stood straight up and scanned the darkness with shaky eyes. He couldn't see anything through the shadows and thick tangle of vegetation. The full moon could barely make it through the trees, and the stars were spectral dots behind the lush green canopy overhead. He started walking, quicker than he had meant to, further back into the woods. Somehow the sound seemed to have come from in front of him, even though he had walked less than a mile to the spot no more than a half hour before. He knew that he could bend around the small bog to his right and come back out on the other side, only a little ways down from the road where he entered. The guitar was slung around his shoulder, and he tried to keep his mind on his feet, one foot in front of the other, and not panic as he hurried away from the coverage of the willow tree. As he came into the opening, he heard movement behind him, something rustling through the bushes in pursuit. Instinctively, he started to run, no longer concerned with his noise or movement, as his primal radar told him he had already been found. His foot plunged deep into a muddy hole, and he felt water fill his shoe and soak his patchy socks. He stumbled forward, almost falling completely into the shallow, murky water, but catching himself on a fractured tree branch sticking up from a mossy log. The guitar slumped off his shoulder, landing with a slap and the faint reverberation of dissonant notes. A frog, fat and content, leapt into the water beside it, and he cursed its happy life. There was another howl, much closer than before, and he scrambled over the rotting wood and fell flat, cramming himself up against it on the other side. He laid still for as long as he could, hardly breathing and shutting his eyes so hard they watered. The sound of a hunt shuffled through his surroundings, and he knew that whatever was out there had found his scent. He could hear nostrils sniffing and billowing with effort, savage breathing and a hungry pant. It was nearly upon him, and his mind went blank with impossible decisions. Something in his head said he should run, but his body wasn't listening, paralyzed with fear and hesitation. A long, clawed paw stepped on the log. Albert could see black nails like talons and thick, bushy gray fur. It was too big and yet too skeletal to be a dog. Wolves and coyotes were more than rare in Louisiana, and somehow Albert knew inside that this was not a normal canine. As another paw came up on the log, it cracked and shifted under the immense size and weight of the creature. He thought of his mother and what few happy memories he had left. The stench of the beast was unbelievable, and he could feel the hot air coming from its mouth. A snout bigger than a bear's poked over the timber, and he could see sharp teeth like steak knives in its blood-red gums. He prayed and tried to think about his life instead of his death. Glowing red eyes found him, and just as time stopped and the creature seemed to recognize his form in the earthly bed, the forlorn cry of the train called out. The hound snapped its head toward it and howled back a heartsick answer. It was gone. Albert didn't know what happened. In a hysterical haze, he had faded out completely, and the monster vanished as if it had never been there at all. He laid there for a long, long time. The damp spot in his trousers had started to dry by the time he moved a muscle. The stalked feeling that something was waiting for him to stand and reveal himself before it pounced and ripped him to shreds only gave way when the tightening in his joints became too sore to bear. Rising like an uprooted part of the scenery, Albert pulled himself from the sludge and balanced on the ruptured log. He grabbed his guitar, partially submerged in the forest gumbo, without thinking about it. Silt poured out of the sound hole like a bucket. He looked all around him, waiting for those fangs to snatch him from the dark. Imagining them gripping his face and pulling him off into the gloom, he thought about how no one would miss him. His mother had died the year before. Albert shambled from the swamp and found the dirt road he came in on, dragging his guitar on the ground behind him. A desolate cry foraged in the twilight. That was Hellhound Cry from No More Days. Please find it on Amazon. Thank you.